Hello and welcome to the Decentralized Justice broadcast. My name is Federico Ast. I am president at the Cooperative Cleros, and our guest today is Professor Amy Schmitz. Amy is a distinguished law professor at the Ohio State Moritz College of Law, specializing in dispute resolution. She has an extensive background in teaching, research, and practicing law, and has received numerous awards and recognition for her contributions to the field. She's also an accomplished author, co-authoring influential books and publishing numerous articles. In particular, let me mention the new Handshake, Online Dispute Resolution and the Future of Consumer Protection, that she co-authored with our friend, mutual friend, I would say, Colin Rule. So welcome, Amy. It's great to have you here.
Super fun. No, thanks for inviting me.
Amy, let's start as we start with all our guests. Tell us a bit about your background, your story, and how did you get into the field of dispute resolution?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I really do come from, just as the name of the podcast, my focus has been access to remedies, access to justice. And so many years ago now, I'm feeling quite old. I was a professor at University of Colorado, Boulder, and I was doing research on consumer law and consumers' access to remedies, access to justice. And I did an empirical study, and I was focusing on sort of how do consumers, what do they do when they have a problem? How do they get a remedy? Do they pursue remedies? Is it just too difficult? I did both a survey as well as focus groups, so qualitative and quantitative research, and it really showed that basically consumers just give up. For the most part, it's very difficult to get remedies. And so I had been focusing even before that on arbitration. I've always been an arbitration expert, and I had done arbitration when I was in private practice as a lawyer. But then I thought, what if we use technology to make it easier and less expensive for consumers and to sort of lower the hurdles to obtaining remedies? And so then I really kind of fast forward. It was a spring break as a young professor, and I literally flew out to Silicon Valley in order to meet Colin Rule and find out what they were doing at eBay, because I thought that was really an interesting example of a way to make it easier and cheaper and efficient for consumers to actually get remedies.
So I'm guessing this must have been like mid 2000s if Colin Rule was at eBay. When
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. It
um,
was
yeah. What did you
quite a
learn from
while ago.
him? What did you learn what did you learn from his work at eBay? What could
Yeah.
lawyers and dispute resolution professionals learn about how Silicon Valley was approaching that issue?
Yeah. Well, what was interesting is, and what I think really kind of blew my mind at the time, was learning that at eBay, they actually made money by making it easier for consumers to get remedies. So they found, the research showed that essentially by making it easy for consumers to get a remedy if something goes wrong, those consumers actually spent more on the platform, meaning eBay made more money. So it was a win-win, right? Because then you had consumers obtaining remedies, and then you also had the company increasing their profits by creating this efficiency and easy way for individuals to get remedy. And especially, of course, in e-commerce, to me, that made a lot of sense in terms of, we talk a lot in dispute resolution, and even back before any of this in my arbitration research, about fitting the forum to the fuss, meaning creating a process, thinking about system design, creating a process that actually works for that particular type of dispute. And it really seemed quite natural that in e-commerce, you would obtain your remedy online. Why should you have to go somewhere in person when you made the purchase online? Why not resolve the dispute online?
So, one of the things that, I discussed with Colin a bunch of times is that, so Colin was at eBay and they developed, the community review forum and all the things that he did, but kind of the development of online dispute resolution in the after the mid 2000s. It was a bit disappointing. It didn't become as massive as we expected this to be. Why do you think that was the case?
Oh, absolutely. No, I remember getting very frustrated because fast forward, then Colin and I were both involved in the UNCITRAL. That was the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. And it was UNCITRAL Working Group 3. And at that time, the Working Group 3 was focused on creating a global online dispute resolution platform for e-commerce, right? And it was so frustrating to me because I thought, why did it fail? But it did. I mean, it went from 2012 to 2016. It ended with simply a statement that this is a good idea and we should continue looking into it on a global level. But why didn't it succeed? I mean, to me, at the time, it seemed natural and logical, and why wouldn't we do this? But I think it's really difficult. I think law in particular is an area where there's a lot of resistance to change, resistance to innovation. I have a lot of problems with that, but that's really, I think, a big factor here. I think COVID really pushed people to reconsider the use of technology in dispute resolution, but absolutely it fought. I mean, there was a lot of resistance to change. I don't know if you've ever talked to Bill Henderson. He has Legal Evolution, his own podcast, I think, or at least a website. And he talks about diffusion theory and the idea that, you know, maybe a lot of people need to sort of retire and then we can start thinking about innovation. But I kid. But I really do think that there's a resistance to innovation, resistance to change. We're seeing that right now, of course, with sort of AI as well.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned this because I think this same week I mentioned again, I mean, this quote, I think it was Niels Bohr, I mean, who says, I mean, how technology change, how society change happens not because people change their minds, just because all people retire and are replaced, you know, by young people who are used just to different things, you know. So that's,
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's a bit interesting to see that. So, and this is something we see at Kleros in how lawyers and regulators as well interact with us. For example, we have started Kleros 5 years ago, and we kind of are starting to see a new generation of lawyers and regulators who are basically just used to different way to solve disputes because they are native digital people and they are more used to do Amazon kind of resolving claims than going to court, small claim court kind of resolving claim. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is so, especially as a professor. So I have a class that I teach that I created, and I've taught it in a lot of different iterations at Colorado, Missouri, and now here at Ohio State, and I call it Dispute Resolution in the Digital Age. And I chose that name, not ODR, because I think we need it to be broader in thinking about all the different ways that technology is a tool, right? And students, they love it, right? So you get a waiting list, you get students that are really interested in innovation, they're interested in learning these new technologies, they're interested in actually thinking about all the different ways that they could use their law degree. And that might include system design, it might include working for courts and trying to figure out a better way for consumers to access remedies. It might include ways to help self-represented litigants because we do have an access to justice crisis. There's simply not enough legal aid. So this idea that all these legal aid lawyers are going to bring claims and help out individuals who can't afford a lawyer is just not true because we don't have it. It's not there. And so most people just give up when they have to go in person. And so I see excitement among the digital natives, among the students. You know, something, it's funny as you when you note that, I'm sure you've seen this even at your own company, but I mean, when I have a technology problem in the classroom, all I have to do is ask the students and they probably can fix it. So, because they know how to do it, right? I'll be like, oh my gosh, what? And right away they've got it, right? And so I think that we're seeing a lot of sort of interest in innovation, interest in responsible use of technology, which I think is really exciting. You know, I always say technology, it's not all good, it's not all bad, it's how you use it. Right. And so I think that's the key. And I do think that this younger next generation is very interested in the use of technology.
Amy, can you summarize a bit your thesis and the main ideas behind the book, The New Handshake?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So that actually did arise out of Colin and I talking about sort of everything that happened with UNCITRAL. So, you know, kind of having lived through that and seeing how it did not, you know, create a platform on a global level. And then also sort of watching the simultaneous creation of the EU platform that really has not been used very much when you look at it and you look at the research in Europe. And so I think all that was happening at the same time. And we were thinking about what if, you know, we created this whole new idea of trust in the marketplace. And it really was, the handshake was the idea of trust. And that comes from my childhood. I don't know if I told you the story or Colin told you the story, but we were trying to think about a title, and we knew the big idea was that we wanted to create trust in the marketplace for e-commerce. I was remembering as a child growing up in rural Wisconsin, and I would ride my bike down and get corn at the corn stand. And there's literally like a farmer selling his corn on the corner. You ride your bike there, you get the corn, you shake his hand, you pay the money, you look him in the eye, and it was like your handshake was your trust mark. And the idea was then if I went home and my sisters and I started shucking the corn and there were worms or it was bad, you could get on your bike, go back, and that farmer would give you new corn because it was part of trust. It was a sort of building this trust, and it was that deal on a handshake that really did used to exist. But in an online marketplace, of course, you don't look the person in the eye, you don't physically shake their hand. So the idea was, what if we create an online system for essentially building digital trust in consumer online transactions? And so it would build that new sort of digital handshake. And so that was the new handshake.
I can relate to that. I mean, being from Argentina, so lots of the transactions that are done in a kind of emerging economy are based on credit, and credit that is not enforceable in court because of weakness of institutions. So your word, I mean, your good faith is like your reputation is like your credit. It's your Equifax, let's say.
Yeah, it really is. It is. It's your bond, right? Because if that farmer started, kind of not adhering to quality standards, their farm stand would be out of business. And of course, none of that has any sort of legal contract written, none of that. It was all about sort of reputation. And so a lot of the book really talks about ways to build with a trust mark, with creating reputable and valid dispute resolution systems online. And so that was a lot of the kind of thinking about building this new economy essentially for e-commerce.
Amy, and how do you see? So the new handshake is from 2019, I guess.
2017.
17. Oh, it's older than I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's 6 years ago. Oh, so
Yeah. And I think we
what?
started writing
Yeah.
it in like 2015. So I mean, yeah, I think that's when we started writing it. So it's been percolating for a while. We probably started talking about it in 2013. I don't even know. I'd have to look back at my records, but either way, it's been around a while.
So I mean, 6 years in this fast-moving world. That's a lot. I mean, what are the evolution you've seen, especially recently? With AI and ChatGPT. How do you envision this new technology affecting dispute resolution?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I really learned in the past, 6 years since the new handshake, we had very sort of high hopes and thought if you build it, they will come, right? So we sort of kind of phrase from the show about, I forget, what is it, the one with Kevin Costner, but anyway, I forget the name of the movie, but the idea that, if you build this, that obviously it will work, right? But it's much more complicated. And that really led me to focus more heavily on dispute system design and sort of going back to basics, right? And I think what happens in some of these areas is you might not really think too much about the other points of interest, for example, politics and different sort of interests and leaders. Who are the leaders, right? Who's going to lead this charge? Just because we think a lot of vendors are going to want to create this kind of a system, that doesn't mean they will, right? Because a lot of people have different incentives for their company, different incentives, what they're trying to achieve. They may not want to make it easier for consumers to get remedies. I had done some research actually kind of going over to the business school and really rolling up my sleeves and looking at, they consider it benign business to ration remedies. That's just what you do because that makes sense from a business standpoint, because the idea is that will increase your profits. Now, I think that's short-sighted because of the research we saw with eBay, but I think eBay also had it a little bit easy because they controlled the payment system at the time, PayPal, and also they could sort of control enforcement. So that's the other piece that we've really learned in the last 6 years is very important, is when you have a clear enforcement mechanism, that helps make that platform more useful, more helpful. When it's just optional or it has no enforcement mechanism, I think it has some struggles. And we've seen quite a few ODR providers kind of disappear that set up shop, good intentions, and it's just difficult because if you can't enforce it, then how much value is it going to have? So I think that's created a whole new sort of challenge for the ODR field, online dispute resolution field. But I also think to your question about AI and ChatGPT, that's a whole different sort of ballgame. I feel like that's a whole different conversation about ways that we could use AI to benefit, but we also have to be aware of the limitations of these sorts of large language models. And there are limitations, especially ChatGPT. There are definite limitations.
I mean, tell us a bit about, so for the audience, maybe don't know what is the design of a dispute system. Can you explain a bit how that works, what that is, and then how you can use these new tools like AI, ChatGPT into those design of dispute systems?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So when we really are intentional, and even the way I teach my class, my dispute resolution in the digital age, we do it through this lens, through the lens of system design and digital system design in particular. And what that means is you, at the very beginning, you're intentional about thinking, okay, what are the goals? What do we want to achieve through this process? What are we trying to do in this realm, right? So if you're dealing with e-commerce, for example, what is the goal here, right? Are we trying to create remedies for consumers and lower costs for the company? That's fair, right? But actually being intentional and thinking, all right, what are the goals we're trying to achieve? One. Number two, what are the resources that we have, right? So what are the resources, which is another problem sometimes because you might be ambitious and thinking, I can build this wonderful thing, but you might not have the money or the resources or the people, the talent, the developers that you need, right? So what are the resources that we need? But also thinking about what are the power structures. All too often that is not considered, but it's very important, right? Are there power differentials here? Are there certain sort of power imbalances that we need to adjust for and be aware of? That's also important. And then additionally, who are the stakeholders? All the stakeholders. That's another one that often is not considered. I was invited as an expert on a court project somewhere. I don't want to say where, but anyway, at the table, they had a bunch of law professors, but it didn't include the judges. It didn't include the technologists who were going to build it. It didn't include all the stakeholders that needed to be at the table. And I right away raised my hand and said, we need all the stakeholders at the table when we're creating these systems, right? And so what are the different interests? What are the needs? What are the goals? And really thinking this through in an intentional manner. And then finally, who are the leaders? Having a leader in any sort of system design, if you want to make it happen, creates huge synergies. I have an example is Shannon Salter with the CRT in Canada. I think she did a great job as a leader. I mean, she really championed the Civil Resolution Tribunal and wanted to bring it to fruition. And as a leader, she did. And so I think having leadership as well is really important because I've seen other projects kind of die on the vine because nobody was actually leading the charge. Nobody was really trying to pursue and make it happen.
I think one of the main advantages, of blockchain is that it can solve one of those big problems of the design of systems, that is the enforcement. So if you can have the assets controlled by the blockchain, then it's easier to enforce, especially, in transnational, cross-border kind of disputes where, which are more and more common these days, and that it's basically impossible. So everyone knows how hard it is to enforce an arbitration award, even in like multi-million-dollar cases. Imagine going to arbitration to solve like a couple $100, case. I mean, award for a small dispute over some, freelancer, in another country. So that's one of the key things that I think the blockchain, add as value to the dispute resolution. What are your thoughts about blockchain in general? What do you think? How can it help to better decision systems in dispute resolution?
Yeah, so I do think that blockchain provides another means for sort of trust. So you're creating essentially, I mean, it's just another mechanism for building trust, right? And so I do think smart contracts and direct enforcement through smart contracts can be quite powerful. But at the same time, I think it's another area where we have to fit not only the forum, meaning the process itself, or, do you want mediation, arbitration, negotiation, but also the technology to the problem, to the context, to the people. So fitting it to the fuss and the folks, somebody said to me, so meaning to the problem and to the people that would be involved. And I think if somebody trusts that system and it works for them, and it's the type of problem that is best solved using blockchain, it makes sense. I think it's a nice like a case study in digital dispute system design, showing us an example of where it makes sense. And it might not be right for all people or all cases. If you're somebody who knows nothing about blockchain and you don't trust it, then it's probably not the best system for you. But if it's a way that is better for you, if it can eliminate costs of financing and letters of credit and other things that have to be provided in an international transaction, for example, then I think it might make sense for different people, depending on their problem and what their needs are, what are their goals, what do they trust, right? And so I think it's an example of something that is very useful in different contexts.
So we are in this new world of dispute and of resolution for those disputes. I mean, what are the ethical challenges that are arising in this new ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge. It's actually a little ironic, I guess, but trust is both a pro and a con, right? So on the one hand, it could be a means for building trust, building automatic enforcement, building in a system that could be more efficient and effective for certain individuals, depending on their problem. I actually think it has a lot of promise. But then trust is kind of a double-edged sword, because then there's the skeptics who say, wait, this is unethical. Is this, especially if it's tokenized, is this gambling on a dispute resolution? Is this, and so you get a lot of sort of concerns from that angle. I think the challenge is trying to figure out all the ways to sort of prevent power imbalances or prevent individuals from gaming the system. And so that is another piece that does happen in all system design, not just with blockchain, but with anything. You're always going to have this question regarding repeat player advantages and whether or not the system can be gamed. Now, what I think is sort of unfair is to sort of complain about blockchain when the truth is the courts have repeat player advantages. Right? Big law firms that go to court all the time, they game the system, right? But we don't talk as much about that. But so I think it's true of any dispute resolution mechanism. And so it's a challenge, but it's an opportunity as well. I mean, I think there's different ways that you can address these concerns. And I think this is true in any type of system design. I've never seen a system design that is absolutely perfect. At least, I mean, maybe you have, but I haven't.
I haven't, and to be honest, I feel, I mean, I relate a lot to what you said. I mean, and there is this last book by Richard Susskind, who is like very important, researcher on the future of justice, and he has this idea that when people, compare ODR systems to like traditional court systems, they use like an idealized version of how courts work that has nothing to do with how the system actually works, So
100%.
Right?
Yes. I actually got in trouble. I said, any system that sort of banks literally makes money on inefficiency needs to change. And I think a lot of sort of the traditional old school ways that we've been resolving disputes, it doesn't work for most people with real problems. It's not built for real people with real problems. And I think, we absolutely have this idealized version. I mean, the questions sometimes when people, if we're going to do correct comparison, so if you were doing a comparative study and you wanted to be super academic about it, and you really were doing a comparative study, think if you were a scientist, okay, creating a new drug, you would do a correct comparative analysis. So you would compare with a placebo, but it would be looking specifically at what happens in the real world. We don't do that in the law. Instead, they'll say, oh, this compared to this beautiful version where everyone gets a free legal aid lawyer and they get their day in court. And all these wonderful things that don't occur on a daily basis. And so, yeah, I actually have to say I agree with that. And I don't know what well, I do. I think there's so much tradition and so much history in the sort of legal field that it is very, going back to your first question, I mean, I think there's a lot of resistance to change, resistance to innovation. And I'm hoping that that's going to change. I do actually see particular judges. I've had different judges that I've been talking with over the last decade, I suppose, but even more so in the last couple of years, where they are looking for innovation. They are realizing that they cannot help all the people that have problems, right, through their traditional way that they're operating. And so that I think is exciting. I'm hoping we see more leaders in this field who do want to make a difference and do want to make it easier for real people with real problems to get access to remedies.
Amy, what piece of advice could you give to a young professional who is interested in a career in ODR and use of technology for justice?
Yeah, so what I think is exciting again is the fact that there are all these different careers, right? I mean, back in the day, right, your only option was you graduate from law school and go work at a big law firm, and that was pretty much, the goal, right? Or maybe you go into criminal and you're going to be a prosecutor or a defense attorney. But it was pretty traditional in terms of what your options are. I see so many students. I mean, I think it's pretty exciting here at Moritz College of Law. We actually have like a leading dispute resolution program, and I see a lot of students that are really interested in being designers of online programs, working in systems that are helping self-represented litigants and lowering the hurdles to remedies. Thinking about how can we use AI to help lead individuals to understand their rights, because so many people do not even know what their rights are in any given transaction. So I think that that's really exciting. And the advice I always tell my students, and I've been saying this forever, even before ODR, I just think it's really a good idea as a student to learn things that the older people don't know so that whatever workplace you get to, it makes you really valuable because you know something that they don't know. Even when I was in law school, because we didn't even there was no such thing as an ADR class because everything you learned was about litigation, right? And so I went over to the psychology department at the university and took an ADR course from the psychology department, and I knew all about mediation and arbitration. And when I got to the law firm right away, I was doing mediations and arbitrations, and I had a lot of real practice because of the fact that I knew more about it than the older people who only knew about litigation. So I just, again, think in this area of technology and understanding, learning about AI, what are the benefits? What are the risks? Again, how can we use it responsibly in the legal practice? Those are all really important pieces of learning that can be tremendously useful for the rest of your career. It also opens up possibilities that I think are really exciting and fun.
And also a bit like lots of people who work on the ODR industry are not lawyers. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I mean, Colin is not a lawyer, right? So there is a cross-discipline, kind of a need. I don't know, your students are all lawyers, or do you have like students of different professions?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. One of the sort of exciting things I'm doing now is wearing another hat, meaning I'm not just a law professor. I also work with the Translational Data Analytics Institute, which is a multidisciplinary project here at Ohio State. And the idea is translating how data analytics and AI, how do they translate into different areas, right? So you have psychologists, sociologists, you have medicine, you have pharmacy. I mean, you've got people, sustainability and environmental issues. So you have people from a lot of different disciplines. And I believe strongly in breaking down silos. And it's very important to have cross-disciplinary, cross-cutting individuals involved in these processes and online dispute resolution and thinking about access to justice and how technology can help and hurt. And so I think it's really important to have this cross-cutting, these types of possibilities. I have a new course that's going to be offered to all students from any discipline coming up this fall. And I just think that having these opportunities to talk about technology and dispute resolution should include non-lawyers as well as lawyers. Again, going back to my table, I think everyone has to be at the table. we learn so much from each other. If you just talk to yourself all day, you don't learn anything, right? So if you just have a bunch of lawyers talking to each other, they're just going to bask in their own sort of silo. And I just think that that really closes the door to new opportunities.
I mean, like something we see, like for example, at Kleros. At Kleros, I'm not I'm not a lawyer. My background is in economics and in philosophy, and so but the team has a bunch of lawyers, but we also have lots of developers, like software developers. Others are mathematicians and people who are experts, in crypto economics and how to create incentives. And they also have this expertise in like machine learning. So we kind of others are, from the point of view of marketing, as you said, it's not just enough. It's not that build it and they will come. You have to have them trust it and know it, and then go and then. So there are so many things that go into making one of these systems successful that it really is not going to be done by lawyers only, right?
Right. Well, and it is really hard. I was talking to a different developer who said having a startup in ODR is like eating glass. Because it's so hard. But it's because there's all these different challenges, and I think there's always going to be challenges when you create something new. I mean, it was a conversation just about like ChatGPT in particular, because there was of course this big call for let's just ban it, right? And let's ban it at any educational institution because students are going to use it to cheat. I think that is never going to be the way to go, because they're still going to use it, right? How do you stop? Oh, we're just going to ban it. I mean, are you going to go to all of the students' homes and like, I don't know how are you going to do this? Number one. Number two, that is very short-sighted.
Yeah.
Instead, think about, well, how do we teach students how to use it responsibly? How do we create assignments? And honestly, I also think that sometimes people are lazy and they don't want to have to learn something new. They don't want to have to create a new class. They don't want to have to think about things differently. Even I think for Kleros, it's a challenge because a lot of the critics probably never tried it, and so I think it is important, people need to learn new things. And even if there's something that you disagree with, I think, trying it out and knowing why you disagree, like understanding. ChatGPT is a great example. Like you need to play with it and figure out what the problems are, where the limitations are. And then you have a better sense of how it is useful and how it is not useful. It's good at some things, it's not good at other things. But that takes practice. It takes, investment of your time. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of go into a rabbit hole. I've spent way too much time on it, but I really wanted to understand it. But it's been very helpful. It's very helpful because now I understand the benefits and the risks.
This is, you're giving me a good way to go for my next question. So ChatGPT is here. It's not going to be uninvented. So it's going to be here forever now, or others, and they're going to get better. How does this affect the work of lawyers in 5 or like 10 years?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, well, and even if you go very like back to the beginning and thinking about large language models and what they are and how you build them, right? So if you even, like, I'm sure you've talked with your, your technologist, and it's very good at digesting large amounts of information in a way that a human would take way too much time, right? And so those sorts of activities, so a lot of the old, back in the day, literally as a young associate at my first big law firm, right? They send all the associates to review documents for hours and hours and hours, billing out at God knows what per hour, right?
Yeah.
That's gone, right? Because those are the sorts of activities where using AI is more efficient and more accurate. So why would we have, the associates billing out at ridiculous amounts doing that type of discovery? And that, I think, is a shift in sort of what we think about when we hire lawyers and what we're learning. And so, those types of activities, I also think the clients are going to speak up. And if a bill comes and it's for lots and lots of time reviewing documents, the client may say, why are you having humans go do that, spending hours and hours and hours on my dime, right? I think there's going to be some pushback if law firms don't change in those ways. That's difficult. I have to say, for smaller firms that maybe don't have the same know-how, the same capacity building, and so that will be an issue. But I also think that it's an opportunity for new types of jobs, right? And so I think It's not going to mean less lawyers. It's just going to mean different skill sets. Because the thing that ChatGPT and a lot of these AI models, for example, ChatGPT only has information through 2021. We also know, if you've ever played with it, it's not very good at creative, forward-thinking problem solving. It really isn't. I mean, it can say it is, but it's really going to be based on that data, old data, right? So the example I always give in my class is, if we only focused on old data and thinking about development and evolution of the law, then I could not teach law, because I would not be able to be a law professor because I'm a woman, right? And I certainly wouldn't own a home, and I wouldn't be able to own property, because if you look at history, right, that was the rule, and I certainly wouldn't be able to vote. So a lot of kind of evolution and forward thinking and creative problem solving, it puts a premium on that, right? Because these are things that the robots cannot, they're just not as good at the human. And so I think that's an example. I also think a lot of the soft skills, they're not going to go away, because when real people have real problems, they come into your office and they are like, so I had a program I did at University of Colorado called the Consumer Empowerment. It was a service learning class where we helped consumers with real problems. Most of those real problems include a lot of different things. And like client counseling is a huge skill. And that's not going to be as well done by a computer, right? This includes psychology, sociology. I think we need more cross-cutting classes with social work, for example, and law, because real people have real problems and they need a real person to help, to empathize, to listen, to be there, to look them in the eye. I mean, a lot of these things actually still are very important. And a lot of the soft skills in dispute resolution, in terms of mediation, where you do need a human. In some circumstances, that's really important in terms of empathy. Not for all things. If you just want a payment of money, you maybe don't care. But I think, again, fitting the forum, fitting the context, fitting it to the problem and to what the goals are, what the needs are of the individual. So anyway, so I think it creates a lot of sort of opportunities for those that have these additional skills. And then, of course, those that actually understand the technology are going to be very beneficial. Every law firm has, a blockchain group, a smart contracts group. I mean, not every, but the bigger law firms. And I mean, I was at recently with the State Bar of Texas, there was a big conference I spoke at, and it was all about blockchain. And the lawyers all had that was a specialty. And I think that we are going to have a lot of new opportunities for this next generation, understanding privacy, understanding compliance, understanding new rules and regulations. The AI Act just passed, right? So there's a lot of sort of new competencies that are going to be necessary for lawyers in this next wave.
I can really, connect with what you're saying about the soft skills. When some person goes to a lawyer, they are under stress, right? And they need human support. And sometimes in interviews, and they ask me this question, I kind of, have you seen this movie of a guy who falls in love with his computer system? His operating system. Right. This AI stuff can simulate well enough being a human, but in the end of the day, it's not a human, so it's not the same thing, right? Even if they can fake it well enough, right? At least for now,
At least for now. Maybe it will get, better. We had a panel on metaverse that I sort of moderated at a recent conference, and maybe there are some uses. I actually could see dispute resolution in the metaverse for like gaming disputes where the dispute occurred in the metaverse in a game, and it might make sense in those circumstances. Maybe you're more comfortable operating as an avatar. But in most cases, it still matters to have a real person who can do a real handshake or a real hug in some circumstances, and I think, have you tried out any of those simulators for like negotiation training using an avatar?
Not for mediation, but I have used lots of chatbots stuff like and they are getting better, but
They're getting better, but
it's not. You cannot shake their hand, really, right?
Yeah. And I'm sorry, but sometimes it's a little creepy. I'm sorry, at least maybe it's just me, but there was one that, there was a few of us who were using it, and they wanted our feedback, and I'm like, I'm sorry, but it was just kind of creepy.
It's creepy, right?
And that's not good, right? Real people have real problems, but it is funny. I don't know if you've, so it was interesting. I was doing some research and kind of checking out the limitations and the uses. I mean, don't get me wrong. I actually do think there's uses for ChatGPT and for other large language models. And let me say, I think they're getting better. I think we're going to have a new digital divide, though, that we should be aware of, which is this. Large law firms who have a lot of money are creating their own in-house systems that are going to be stronger, that are going to be more powerful, that have more data, and they're going to have an advantage. So I think that is one thing we need to think about. We're talking so much about open access and open AI, but there's a lot of private development that we need to be aware of. But putting that aside, so ChatGPT tells you that it has a personality. Have you played with it? Do you know this?
I have used a lot. I mean, but who has a personality? ChatGPT has a personality.
It claims it has a personality. So I asked because
You know that.
and it was just really funny because then it said it can have different personalities depending on what you want, and that it can be funny. So I asked it to be funny, and I didn't find it funny. So
I mean,
but it was really interesting. Yeah. So anyway, well, and then of course there's those articles. Now,
one idea I had about ChatGPT is like that, to do like an episode of the podcast where I interviewed ChatGPT about lots of legal stuff, that same questions I ask you. I have some interface that like voice interface of ChatGPT and see what it says.
Yeah.
I'm curious
Actually,
to see.
Really, yeah, no, I love that. I think you should, because that would be really funny. It'd be very interesting, but actually interesting as well to sort of learn, is it getting smarter? Sometimes I do think it's getting smarter. I think that's true of any AI. I think it gets smarter and it gets better.
I mean, it's not even a year old. I mean, in this consumer, massive. So who knows what's going to happen in like 3 years? This might be, so good that, I mean, I don't know. That's why I don't like to make predictions.
No, and I also have a warning for, I think, the other piece that we need to remember. We had done a big survey of dispute resolution professionals, mediators, arbitrators, and their use of technology. And some of the results were a little concerning. I think there's a lot of sort of misuse in terms of privacy and confidentiality. No, you don't put into ChatGPT client confidential information, right? But people just think, oh, it's just between me and my computer, it's all fine. No, you're sharing that information. And so I think, again, going back to sort of new jobs and new areas of focus for young people in school, is for students, is thinking about cybersecurity and privacy and all of the sort of promise and pitfalls. And that is really important as well.
Amy, one last question. What books, courses, materials, or whatever you want, I mean, could you recommend to people who want to learn more about all this, the future of dispute resolution and all these things we have discussed?
Yeah, so I think that I do think sort of getting even sort of base level thinking about dispute resolution and system design. Jan Martinez, and there's a group out of Stanford that has a great book on system design. Incidentally, stay tuned. Jan Martinez, same one from Stanford, and I are writing a new book on digital dispute system design. So stay tuned for that one. But I also think there's a lot of other materials that you can find throughout the world. And that's the piece I think is really exciting. There's interesting, really cool stuff that they're doing in Europe with digital dispute system design. I also think now there's a lot of open access books, free books that you can find. And that I think is really good and exciting, that you can find when you go online. In terms of other particular books, of course you mentioned Susskind, definitely a must read, but I find a lot of the material in terms of white papers and material on SSRN that are very new are really helpful. And also, I just want to, there's a conference starts this Monday. So starting on Monday, there's going to be a big conference in Portugal, and it looks at AI and the law. And the proceedings include not just lawyers, but also a lot of technologists, sociologists, psychologists. There's researchers from all type. And we also have workshops. There's one workshop that we're organizing on Monday that is specific to AI and access to justice. And you can find online the proceedings that include all the papers. So I think there's a lot of sort of cutting edge information that you can obtain without having to spend any money. And I think anything that's a book in print is going to end up outdated by the time it's in print. So a lot of times I think it is important to see what the latest information is.
Amy, thank you very much.
You're welcome.